need the microphones. Oh yes, apparently we have to use the microphone. Sorry, we'll get more of us. Exactly, yes. Good evening.
Is this being streamed?
Possibly.
Oh, this is being streamed.
Should have combed my hair, sorry. I don't know where the cameras are.
Everyone at home. Okay. Well, hello, Gwilym.
That's a good start. Hello, Tom.
I'm Tom, that's Gwilym. We've known each other for a long time.
A very long time, yes. Yes.
But we met we were both students at the Royal Academy of Music, but actually we hardly had any interaction, despite being in the same building for 4 years, because I was on the classical course and Gwilym was on the jazz course, and it wasn't easy to meet.
Only in the bar, really. So yeah, that was the only place you get to meet.
I was too busy practicing. But we started working together a few years after we graduated. Do you remember the first thing we did together?
I can't actually. It's been such a long time.
I'm trying to remember. I think we were put together by Tim Garland. I think that was the first gig we played together, 2008 or 9, something like that. Homage to Father Bach.
Oh yes.
Used to call it fromage.
Fromage to Father Bach. Yes. The great Tim Garland, wonderful saxophone player and a great composer also, and I think for both of us really a hero in terms of being able to cross over between the classical and the jazz sides, which is something which is very personal to both of us, and actually what the whole evening is about tonight, really.
And that concert, when we first played together, I did a Bach oboe and violin concerto with Tim, so he was playing the oboe part on soprano sax, and I think you were playing continuo plus. So actually, in some ways, it was not dissimilar to what we're doing tonight. So this idea of Baroque music being opened up for exploration has legs, and we've been doing it in one way or another for quite a long time. Why do you think Corelli works with this treatment?
It is interesting because I think sometimes people like to have things in pigeonholes. We have classical music, which is all written out, and we have jazz music, which is all improvisation, and never the twain shall meet in a way. But of course, historically, classical composers and instrumentalists used to be wonderful improvisers, and sadly it's a kind of skill that's really been lost in the sphere of being a classical musician, apart from the odd exception of wonderful people who've really embraced it. And of course, I mean, we still have organists, church organists improvise a lot, classical organists, but aside from that, and of course, cadenzas and concertos always used to be improvised, and of course now most people kind of play written cadenzas, which is really sad to think that. I mean, I think when you say you play an instrument, you play the violin or you play a cello or you play the piano, to me means that you can go to that instrument and you can make some music without needing to have sheet music in front of you. And sadly, I think that's not something really that always gets taught these days. It feels to me like, sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a rant now, sorry, just a minor one, but it feels like if you can only play a catalogue of music on your instrument, however vast that catalogue is, it's not really truly getting to play the instrument, it's just playing a massively vast catalogue of music. I mean, this is such a common, easy parallel to language in terms of actually really knowing a language or just speaking a very vast lot of phrases that you've learned. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's how it feels to me.
I do, and the first, so my training was much more typically classical. In fact, I never really had any formal jazz training. That's not quite true. Because I had jazz drums lessons when I was at school. But on the violin, I never. Corelli on drums. But so having had that traditional classical training, I remember realizing that something was wrong when there was something limiting about it when in sort of early 20s you'd be maybe going to a party and you'd have your violin, and me and my classical friends would be asked by somebody to play something, and your instinct is, oh no, I'm sorry, I haven't got the music, or I haven't practiced anything, and I knew this just didn't sit right with me. I knew it was crazy to have practiced an instrument for tens of thousands of hours, but to not be able to play anything at that moment on Friday night just because of some really silly reason. And I think that's the danger with classical, is that it's so much about right and wrong, and you've got to be sober, and you've got to be in shape, you've got to have the music in front of you, you've got to have plenty of light on the music, all the conditions have to be perfect, otherwise silence. And that was a key moment for me, and I decided I didn't want to be one of those people, and I'd much rather be somebody who would just have a go and use my violin and my ability to play it to communicate and give people a good time, which is, that's nothing to do with genre. But I noticed in the spiel that went out about this concert that it didn't really say too much about genre. It didn't say jazz musician Gwilym and classical musician Thomas join forces for a fusion or crossover. I'm happy it didn't use those words, because they're not always that helpful. But just going back to something you said about improvisation, that the trouble when you improvise is it's very hard not to get stuck in one genre. And I think a lot of people think they have a connotation of improvising, which is kind of like bluesy busking, which isn't maybe that all that brilliant. And with this thing, we're not really playing jazz at times. In the Corelli, the 3 Corelli sonatas that we're playing, it's not jazz improvisation, it's not purist kind of Baroque improvisation. It's much more personal, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. It's the idea is that we want to create, so that sounds very pretentious, we want to create, music should be an enjoyable experience for you, the listener. And there are so many elements in the music that can make something enjoyable or not enjoyable to you. For me, when I'm listening to music, and of course being a musician, it's sort of the classic sort of busman's holiday to be going to listen to music. When I listen to music, I personally want to be taken on a journey, to be honest. If I want to listen to music, it's because I want to get away from, you want a departure from your, everyday things that are going on in your life, and to be taken to a different place by the music. And I would imagine, and it's impossible to say, with being a musician, I would imagine hopefully for those of you who are not musicians who come to listen to music, that would be high up on the list of what you want to get out of it. You want to be transported, removed from your everyday life, and listen to something that makes you feel emotions. And for me, that's an incredibly important part of music, whatever the genre or whatever the style, is to evoke emotions in the people who are listening to what you do. So when we improvise, whether it's in a classical style or folk or jazz or whatever it is, we're trying to use the technical skills that we've accrued on our instrument and technical knowledge within the rudiments of music to create this nebulous idea of an emotion. Why, if you go from playing a kind of a major third to a minor third, that's a very crude, boring thing, but why? It's a happy sound to make you feel sad. But why is that? That's saying, isn't that incredible that a movement of a semitone can make you go, oh, like that. So for me, those very, very almost basic sort of manipulations of the emotions by use of techniques on your instrument is at the forefront of what we're trying to do. It's what you try to do as an improviser, it's what you try to do as a composer, and it's what you try to do as an interpreter of music. And I have to say at this point, that's something which I have got the unbelievable utmost respect for Tom especially, and everyone who goes out and plays a piece of music which is written. And for me, I trained as a classical musician, but what I really struggled with was this concept of right and wrong. You know, I was a 10-year-old going to a music school, and if you play 3 bad notes, and that's a wrong, bad performance, and you're a bad person, and you're going to fail, and you'll never have any concerts. And that really stuck with me, to be perfectly honest. And I could never become a full-on classical musician going round and playing 100 concerts a year, Rachmaninoff concerto. I mean, I played French horn as well. And that was incredibly difficult, because as soon as you get nervous, of course, your breathing starts to go, and that, you know, all the problems that you have playing a piano is even more exacerbated with that. So the people who go out like Tom and can do an incredible job of playing this piece of music that you know every single note of, and to go out there, I mean, was it last year you were at the Albert Hall? Playing solo. I mean, for me that's mind-blowingly incredible to have the nerve, the strength, the character to go out there and do that. And I know what Tom would say in response to this. He'll go, well, it's amazing to go out and play when there's no music in front of you. So I think the wonderful thing about this, you know, we're not just saying it, genuinely, it's a really beautiful thing for us to work together, because I think we both appreciate the skills that we have coming from our directions, and we're finding a way to meet in the middle and hopefully grow and learn from that. And actually that as we get older, sorry, I'll stop talking in a minute. As we get older, the idea of learning and growing and developing as a musician becomes an absolutely important part of what you do. We don't just want to go out and play concerts every day for the rest of your life and not get anything from it. I think we both share that desire to improve and to develop what we do. I mean, it's kind of everything we do is a work in progress until you die, really, which is quite exciting. You know, it's nice to think you're never going to stay the same, and to feel like you can get a little bit further with what you can achieve and be a bit more well-rounded as a musician as every concert goes by. I think that's what we both probably share, that desire to do that. I
think we also quite enjoy being out of our comfort zone, and when we do these projects together, you know, I'm forcing you to play some really demanding piano parts, particularly with the last project we did, which was with Bach. Really hard piano parts that you did in an exemplary way, and from my part, it's when, you know, I don't have that same experience of jazz and improv that you do. So for me, they're quite sort of sometimes quite heart-stopping moments when you're just, when you've built up this incredible kind of sonic space, this fabric that's so delicate and so perfect, and you're so acutely aware that if you play even a bit out of tune, or if you play a note that doesn't really belong in that harmony, you could just kill the atmosphere in the room. So I find that challenging. And I think that's why we're still doing it, why we keep on coming back for more duo projects, because it's not that often in my career that I get challenged in this way. You know, I play from the music all the time. You know, I'm paid to not mess up, as you said, but this feeling of silence and stillness and not knowing what the next note I'm going to play is, it's a special feeling, real adrenaline, in a really lovely way. That's why I keep doing it.
And very well too. I think the nice thing about tonight is the project we did before was starting about Bach violin sonatas, and we've talked about this a bit over the last couple of days. And that project, because the Bach is so perfect, the music is so perfect and so complete. When we were approaching opening it up for improvisation, the improvisation moments and the places where we opened out from the part had to sort of be in between the written notes, because the written notes, once they were there, were there and complete and wonderful. Tonight is very interesting because the Corelli, which Tom sort of decided on this idea of moving to the Corelli, there's a lot more scope for us actually to open up the written music, which I think is really exciting, because for both the sort of the soloist, essentially, and for me, the accompanist, the continuo, we can actually take a lot more liberties with the basic material. So it's not that there are places where we're playing in between the movements, sort of segues and that kind of thing, which is what we did with the Bach. But with this, we can actually sort of start to hopefully open things up inside the actual music itself. And that for me is exciting, because that's what the musicians in 1685 or whenever it was would have done. That's exactly what they would have done. We have this thing called figured bass in the accompanying part, which we call the continuo part. And this is a series of numbers which tell you the harmonies that you have to play. So the music I have in my part, there's a guide to the written notes, and then there's these numbers. And it's very interesting, because I wasn't schooled in learning figured bass. I mean, I did when I was about 11 or 12, and I've completely forgotten it. But as a jazz musician, we do basically a modern version of that. So we have a chord symbol that might say F sharp dash, which means F sharp minor 7, for instance. So that's basically like a modern version of this figured bass, which has been around for hundreds of years. So there's quite a lot of places I've gone through the part, and I've just written my own sort of modern version of the figured bass, and that's what I'm reading off, with a little bit of guide from the notes that are there. So what we're doing has been done for hundreds of years, but somewhere I think it got forgotten along the way. So it's quite exciting to try and bring that back, both in a reverential way to the way it was done in the beginning, but hopefully in a way that, as Tom, as you said, is sort of personal to us. We're not trying to sort of go rock and roll or jazzing it up. We're trying to do it in a way which works with the original, but is something that hopefully is unique to us doing it.
Yeah, we're not trying to make a statement that tearing up the rule book and this is how it should be done. I mean, I'm aware that it's not for everyone, and there will be things that perhaps you won't like. It's completely in the moment. You know, we've rehearsed as much as we can, but the excitement is in the spontaneity and things happening, and there's no safety net. So when things are happening, some of them won't be recording quality perfect. But I mean, it's this idea of taste, and I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, but about 10 years ago, I was booked to play a Mozart concerto in a music festival just on the borders with Wales, in Prestine, and I was there for 4 or 5 days and played in a bunch of concerts. And the final night concert, I was doing this Mozart concerto. And as there's a lot of contemporary music happening at this festival, I thought it was a great opportunity to try playing jazz cadenzas improvised on the spot in this Mozart concerto. And I didn't think anything about taste or what the reaction would be to it, or if people would think that I was making a statement and trying to be like Nigel Kennedy, or, you know, I was just doing it just because it felt natural to me, because I had some experience playing jazz and I thought I'd try it. And it was fascinating because it was really polarizing. Like, at the end of a number of people walked out during the first movement cadenza. The big heavy church door banged, but I was so sort of concentrating on what I was doing that I didn't really bother me. But then it banged again in the cadenza I did in the second movement, and apparently only 5 people left, but they left in 3 groups. Yeah. So I knew that there was a bit of a scene that was created, but we got to the end, and it was almost like one person would be standing up, clapping and shouting, and then 2 people sitting down with their arms folded, and then a couple clapping wildly, and then a chairman of the or a trustee of the festival looking absolutely furious. And the vicar, I remember the vicar loved it more than anyone. He said to me afterwards, "That's exactly what Mozart would have done." But the point, so maybe 50, it was 50-50. People either loved it or they hated it. But the people who hated it really hated it, and they felt like, this is maybe more true of Mozart than it would be with Corelli, but they felt like you can't mess with our Mozart. You know, Mozart is perfect, and to change it is, not that I did change it, I just made up my cadenzas in a jazz style. But it taught me that you have to think a little bit about how these things are going to go down, and you have to kind of own your decision to do them. And yeah, it's not for everybody, and I imagine that Corelli purists wouldn't would buy the CD if we were to record one. But yeah, I'm curious to see who comes tonight, and I mean, of the people here, who considers themselves a sort of more of a jazz audience, and who considers themselves more of a classical audience. So a few more, like both, great, me too, that's what we want. Yeah, let's open it up. Yes, I think that was part of the problem. No, they were completely surprised.
You need a sign outside. Like there may be flash kind of pyrographics. There may be some.
Yeah. I do think that was a big part of the problem. I think if they'd been prepared for it gently, then. But yeah, it must have been a shock when I launched into the first one. Have you ever had an experience like that when people have walked out, or you've had a sort of furious audience reaction?
Well, I mean, I think it would be good to mention almost exactly the opposite thing, which is one of the lowest moments of my sort of musical career, which actually never got as far as the audience, but I was booked to play Rhapsody in Blue. I can't remember which orchestra. It was City of London or something in London. And I'd got this together and learnt it all. And it's sort of quite fiendish. And again, for me, it falls into this category of it's a piece of music that a lot of people know. So if you play a wrong note, people are kind of going to know about it. But anyway, as a sort of throwback for my kind of trauma of being a kind of young classical guy having to do this very, very tough thing, I really hate memorizing things. That really stresses me out. I get very, very nervous about doing things from memory because I think I'll have a memory lapse. Because actually I had one when I was about 11 playing a Bach prelude and fugue in a concert. I had a memory lapse about 20 seconds in, and I had 3 goes at trying to play this Bach prelude and fugue, and I couldn't get past the thing, and I had to leave the stage in tears, and that's always really struck me. So anyway, I was doing most of it for music, but it's like pages and pages and pages if you're doing it, and there's no time to turn it. So I'd kind of basically learned almost every third page, and I'd managed to cut a few out with a couple of little notes to myself. Anyway, so as it happened, I got asked by aforementioned Nigel Kennedy to play with him a gig in Russia the night before this rehearsal. And I really wanted to do it because it was a really good opportunity. So I somehow managed to get a flight that flew overnight to get back for this morning first rehearsal with the orchestra. So I was absolutely exhausted. I hadn't had much sleep, and I started playing, and like everything, the wheels just completely fell. It was like everything just disintegrated in front of me. I was trying to play. I forgot everything. I couldn't play anything that was written down. I just couldn't play the piano. It was a disaster. I was really nervous, and I just went to pieces. And you know, when you do a first run through as a soloist with an orchestra, you get to the end of the run through. They usually give you a nice sort of tap to say, "Well done" with that. Like it was just silence. It was just absolutely. It was just heartbreaking. It was awful. So I thought, right, the concerts. I think it was the night after the concerts tomorrow night. I've got to do something here because, when you're booked as a soloist, it's not just like getting the notes right. You're booked as a soloist because of what you bring to the table and your interpretation of it, which is what I have such amazing respect for people who do that. It's not just playing the notes right, it's what they bring to the table. So I thought, well, I've got to find a way of hopefully doing something to to make it my own, because I'm not going to be able to play it perfectly. I'm not going to be able to do what X, Y, or Z could do. Go out there and do an incredible performance, play it perfectly. So I managed to find some places to open it up and improvise. There's actually a kind of sort of Latin section in the second half of the piece, which is sort of ripe for opening up for that. So I made a way of opening up, and then I felt, well, at least I can do something which I can bring hopefully vaguely to the table that maybe somebody else couldn't do. So I did the performance, got through it. It wasn't completely note perfect, but people I think appreciated that I did something that was hopefully a little bit different. So that I had to, that was my kind of get out. I had to do that, really. So that for me, that moment of the orchestra thinking, what an idiot this guy is, that was my equivalent of yours the other way around, I think.
And were the musicians in the orchestra, were they tapping their stands at the end of the concert?
Yeah, they loved it at the end. Yeah, they loved
of course
it.
they did. But you've not played that piece since.
I don't really like playing it, and the thing, it's so difficult when you want to do this jazz and classical, inverted commas, crossover, because you've got to somehow program it. I write a lot of my own music, but the brutal reality of it is that if you want to do something like that, you've got to have a piece of music on the program which is going to get bums on seats. And for a lot of promoters, that's going to be Rhapsody in Blue, Prelude, Fugue and Riff, some sort of Gershwin or something like that, which is wonderful. But for me, it's not at all what I feel a connection to musically. I mean, I love Ravel, Debussy, French classical music. That for me has such a more strong link to jazz. I don't know what you feel about that, but for me, certainly harmonically, there's a much greater link than the kind of Gershwin, which is fantastic, but personally that's not it for me. But you have to put something like that on the program to get people through the door in the first place. So that's always a bit of a challenge. If we weren't playing Corelli tonight, then probably there'd be a lot of people who wouldn't come. If we said we're just playing our own music, it could be exactly the same kind of thing, but people wouldn't come because it's not got Corelli in the program. So
a lot of Corelli fans in Wiltshire.
So that's a constant challenge for us, trying to do something differently. Is doing what we want to do, but in a way that's going to be marketable, and for people actually to come. You kind of hope that if you can get people through the door, then hopefully they'll enjoy what you do. But it's getting them in.
And it's very difficult to put into words what this concert will sound like. There's very scant detail in the information, and I think it says a selection of Corelli sonatas. We're actually doing 3, and it says Dido's Lament by Purcell. That's true, we are doing that. That's only 4 minutes. And it says something else. What else does it say? A new piece.
That's true.
Is it a new piece?
Yeah.
Newish.
Yeah. Well, there's two that we're doing, which are new.
Okay. But in addition to that, we're playing a piece by Arvo Pärt, which I suspect everybody knows. It's called Fratres, and it's just brilliant. And I think that's why it's played so often. And it starts with this solo violin arpeggiation thing, and that has been ripped off countless times in soundtracks for film. Moonlight, if you remember that film, was one of the first to imitate that rapid arpeggiation thing. It's very violinistic, and it's very sort of impressive. So first half is Corelli, Arvo Pärt, Corelli, and the second half, in case you're interested, Gwilym's going to start with a solo, which probably is a bit more leaning towards jazz.
Possibly, yes. I think so, yes.
And then we'll do the Purcell, but we'll open that up for a bit of improv. And then I'm going to play a couple of pieces by an American composer called Nico Muhly, who's an old mate of mine. I met him, he was at Juilliard School in New York. I was at the Academy, and there was a sort of exchange program, and I met him on a project when we were in our early 20s, and he was already complete. He'd written this piece for our little group, and it was so good. So he's gone on to have a massive career. He writes operas for the Met Opera in New York and for ENO. Some of you might know his name, Nico Muhly. And we're going to play 2 pieces for solo violin and drone. And Gwilym is very overqualified to...
Not a drone that flies.
Yeah.
Hasten to add. There probably are pieces now. Somebody must have already written a piece that involves drones.
Who was it? Stockhausen wrote the piece for 4 helicopters, right? For string quartet and 4 helicopters, so it'd be cheaper.
Yeah,
cheaper
just
than
drones would be easy, wouldn't it? Sorry, we digress.
And then we have a first of Gwilym's pieces, which is called A Simpler Time. Why is it called A Simpler Time?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a tribute to the wonderful Milton Nascimento, the wonderful South American composer. So actually sort of trying to evoke a lot of the spirit of the guitar without actually having one. But it's called A Simpler Time because it's not really a simple time at the moment, is it? It's a very difficult time for a number of reasons, sadly, in the world. And just trying to find a link to something which is a bit more, again, positive, and that for me is an important part of music, positivity. You know, it's kind of easy to write negative music or kind of sad music, but actually to write something which is a bit more, hopefully, uplifting is a big part of what I like to try and do. So I guess, yeah, that's probably the briefest explanation of the title.
It's not in a very simple time signature, because it's, as lots of your pieces are, it's in 5, which is kind of challenging to...
That's a little bit different from the norm, but hopefully, I mean, it is definitely more from the jazz side, but I'm hoping that it's going to fit in quite nicely sonically with the rest of the music that we're playing. So we shall see. And actually, what was the thinking behind approaching Corelli in the first place? Actually, I mean, I meant to ask you that because Tom just said when we talked about having some concerts, you know, let's do these Corelli sonatas, and I never got to actually ask you. Why Corelli? I mean, it's brilliant.
So Corelli was a violinist and a very good one, and he writes out suggestions for embellishments and ornamentations, and they're quite complex. I mean, they're really quite modern sounding, and I guess it was realizing that the distance between what he's writing out in the 17th century as possible flourishes, ornaments, decorations, the distance between that and what Charlie Parker plays isn't actually that huge. It's all about connecting, vocally connecting notes in a melody. You know, usually you want to keep it scalic. You don't want to have big leaps. You want to keep it da 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 da, so you can, you know, sing it. Like, don't they say the best melody ever written is "Ode to Joy" because it moves in step. Da 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 da. A good melody avoids big leaps and jumps.
You can think of melody really like, I mean, if you think of a graph, you've got points on a graph, and with embellishment, you're looking in between those points, how to get sort of successfully from that point to the other way around, that point to the next one. So, I mean, what would be a very simple melody, I guess, would be like sort of like an amen, basically. There. So I'm going to put this down. So if we're to look to embellish that, there's like a million ways you could do that. So all those things, we're trying to join the A to the B, and then that's down to the personal taste of the performer to do that. So that's quite an exciting challenge, because you know your starting point, you know your ending point, and then it's down to you to kind of find a fun route to get there.
Yeah. And the other thing about picking Corelli is that I knew that the last of his 12 violin sonatas is actually very famous because I think it's in a Suzuki book. So every student violinist plays it when they're 6, and it's this set of variations on a theme that Corelli didn't write himself. It's called the La Follia theme, meaning the madness, and it was just an incredibly well-known piece of music, I guess like a pop song in 17th century Europe, and this tune over a pretty simple chord sequence just was the greatest hit of its day. I think it was maybe had Portuguese origins, and you can find it in music by Bach and music by Handel and countless others. It's referenced everywhere, and Corelli got round to writing a set of variations on the madness, and it's called the madness because people would dance themselves into such a frenzy listening to this repeated melody, and it gets more and more complicated and decorated and wild and flamboyant, and then you sort of work yourself into a stupor dancing to it, is the idea. So that's why Corelli.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was my question. Yeah.
Should we see if anybody's got
any
a question?
I suppose we should wrap it up then, because we need to go and get smarter.
Anyone?
I just asked about learning to improvise together. So I imagine that you've got to learn to listen to each other very carefully and then respond to what the other person's just played. So I'd just be interested in if you've got any questions about that.
That's a really good question. I think it either works or it doesn't. I mean, it's something that is perhaps difficult to work at. I think as far as I see it, with us, it's always felt quite natural. I think it helps that we both have perfect pitch. I think that really, it just makes it so much. The processing speed. If he plays a G sharp and I don't even need to think what is that note, I can take over from that note. And I think we both listen. I mean, it happened in the rehearsal today. Just we'd already played through this movement, and then we started. We went back to the top and we started playing through it again, and as if by magic, we both stopped on the downbeat of bar 17. It wasn't an obvious stopping place. It just feels like we're very connected.
I think improvise, especially with just two people, you can't think of any other analogy other than it's a conversation. And just like a conversation between two people, if both people are speaking at the same time, that's not going to work. If nobody speaks, then that's not going to work either. So it's got to be, it's a give and take. You're listening, you're giving, you're receiving, and they really are fine margins for the success and failure of that. And that, for me, is why improvised music, I hope, is very exciting to witness as an audience member. Because it is, like Tom said before, you sort of right on the wire, just sort of falling off into the failure of it if you don't get it right. So, without being pretentious about it, I think you have to have really quite honed your skills to the best that you possibly can to be able to make it have a chance of being successful. And the last thing I'd say to that is that when I'm teaching pupils, I think one of the most important words I tell them to think about it is responsibility. When you walk onto the stage, you have the responsibility to the other musicians you're playing with, especially when you're improvising. So what does that mean? The responsibility to be in the best possible shape on your instrument, to be the best possible shape physically that you can, because all of these thought processes that we're going through in absolute real time, thinking what that note that the other person played was, analysing it, working out what that note was, working out what your musical response was, and then working out how to technically carry out that musical response. We're doing that like that. So the last thing you want to be doing is thinking, oh, do I need to turn this thumb over there, or can I play and tune on my instrument? That stuff has to be a given, really. That really has to be a given, and that's really important for students when they're learning their instrument and learning to improvise. You do not want to be thinking about that basic stuff, because to get to that, hopefully to aspire to get to the higher level of improvising, you want to be so tuned into the other person, basically, that's what you're really thinking about. But
we should maybe wrap it up, unless there's another quick question.
Thank you so much. I have been quite frequently here for talks, but this is so shows what two amazing people you are.
No, it's very kind.
Well, I hope you'll stay for the concert.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. Cheers.